12, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I rise to move Amendment 12 and speak to Amendment 13 in my name. This is an adaptation and development of the work by the Noble Lord Winston at committee stage. I see, hopefully he'll be back in a second, not currently in his place, where he put forward the idea of a register. This is my attempt to write into the bill at this stage that register to establish full transparency and traceability of gene editing. Now, the drafting is my own, with help from the Table Office, and thanks to them for that. And I'm not going to claim that this is the perfect way or method of setting this into this legislation, but in this legislation it absolutely should be, for the sake of both transparency and traceability. We're giving commercial companies the right to mess around with the basis of life on Earth, showing their working and allowing the knowledge to be available to others is a small price to pay. Now, the Noble Lord Krebs and I had a detailed debate at committee about whether it's possible to identify gene-edited organisms, and some aspects of that debate remain in dispute. But we heard on Friday's call that should the nature of the gene-editing event be recorded, as this Amendment 12 calls for, then there is absolutely no doubt that any gene-edited organism can be identified. Now, this amendment goes further in calling for the record of the whole genome sequence of the qualifying organism to be recorded. And for the House's information, I think it's worth going a little further into that. Also, an explanation of why this clause should be covered, or why the regulation should be covered by the affirmative procedure. Now, the fact is that whole genome sequencing can accurately identify the full spectrum of unintended mutations at both off-target and on-target editing sites, including inadvertent insertion of foreign DNA. Indeed, I'm not sure, given what we heard from the Labor Lord the Minister in the last group, how, if we don't have this, we can be sure that actually an organism is legal. Multiple reference genomes derived from the whole genome sequencing of major crop plants are now already available in the public domain, and that's yielded important information about the unintended effects of gene editing on the genome. As an example, in a study on gene-edited rice using CRISPR-Cas, whole genome sequencing was used to investigate unintended mutations arising from several different aspects of the gene editing procedure. The procedure, which taken as a whole includes both tissue culture and agrobacterium-mediated cell transformation, resulted in several times more unintended mutations than were found in rice propagated through natural pollination. But if you don't do the whole genome sequencing, then you just simply cannot know that to be the case. Now, we're sometimes told this is too complicated and difficult and too expensive. But there's a fairly recent, we've been talking about how fast this field is moving, what's known as long-read DNA sequencing, which, unlike many things in this area, is actually pretty clear-cut in its own self-description. It provides a continuous sequence that reads up to 1.5 million DNA base units, and so it would provide unequivocal understanding of the placement of long stretches of repeat sequences, something that some of the older methods, which break up the DNA strand, don't do so easily. Several companies offer a long-read genome sequencing service, making this technology readily available. Now, I didn't write this into the bill, and this is another reason why I've put the affirmative procedure in there, but this register could also include requirements for molecular compositional profiling methods, which everyone will be pleased to know are known as omics for short, gene expression profiling, transcriptomics, protein profiling, proteomics, and small biochemical molecule profiling, metabolomics. Let's call them omics. These are now used by thousands of research groups around the world to gain a more comprehensive and deeper insight, not just into the genome, but into how an organism actually functions. It's crucial to understanding the health and disease implications of the genome to see how that genome actually plays out in the proteins in the cells. Now, a 2016 research paper that was published in the extremely prestigious journal Nature used a multi-omics approach to demonstrate that a glyphosate-tolerant GM maize was actually not substantially equivalent to its non-GM relative. The large-scale protein and metabolite alterations were detected were unintended consequences of the GM transformation process, with potential downstream health consequences for the consumer in terms of both potentially the introduction of toxins and the introduction of allergens. So, my Lords, and I see the noble Lord Winston is here, and I would refer people, members of your Lordship's House, back to his speech and the discussion we had in committee in this area. But to actually know what is going on is both scientifically and practically, I would argue, essential. And so that's why I've placed these amendments down. I'm not intending to move to a vote, but I think this is something that the government could commit to, should commit to. And it's interesting that in the discussion that we had on Friday with all of the experts, one of those experts said to me then, "Oh yes, there is a public register of this, that's how it's going to work." Now, I don't know if the noble Lord the Minister can explain this to me. My understanding is there is nothing in the legislation that does provide for a public register. If I'm wrong, I'm very happy to be corrected about that. But these are people who are actually proponents of this whole bill, this whole procedure, and they believe there is going to be a public register. And if that's what the experts are trusting in, if that's what the experts believe are there, is what the experts actually want to be able to use, because that's what this is, a public resource, then I believe that if it's not already there, the government certainly should introduce it. I beg to move.
A member proposed Clause 3, page 3, line 30, at the end, and sent the word